Field report. Submitted by Senior Observer Voss of the Galactic Harmonics Council. Classification. Urgent. Humiliating. Do not share with the junior staff. Let me begin this report by saying, for the record, that I, Voss, veteran of 47 planetary surveys, decorated observer of 11 first contact events, and twice winner of the Galactic Council's Award for Calm Under Pressure, was not scared. I was reevaluating my life choices. There's a difference. It started, as most terrible things do, on a Tuesday, or what the humans call a Tuesday, a day they invented specifically, it seems, to make the rest of the week feel worse by comparison. Our vessel, the Quiet Contemplation, had been orbiting their third planet for 6 of their rotational cycles. Standard procedure. Observe. Catalog. Assess the threat level of the dominant species before making contact. We had done this before. Many times. The dominant species was usually terrified of us. Usually. The first sign that something was wrong came when our scanners detected a human, alone, standing in an open field below our cloaked ship. He was looking directly at us. Not at the sky. Not at the clouds. At us. The cloaked, invisible, scientifically undetectable vessel that no primitive species should have been able to see. He was also eating a sandwich. Perhaps it is a coincidence, said my assistant, Priel, who has the optimism of someone who has never actually met anything in this galaxy. The human then reached into his shirt pocket, produced a small rectangular device, pointed upward, and appeared to be taking a photograph of us. He finished his sandwich. He gave us what our linguistics database later identified as a thumbs up. He walked away. We moved the ship 17 kilometers east. He found us again in 4 minutes. This time, he had brought a friend. The friend was also eating. I want to be very clear about what happened next. We are a civilization that has mapped the core of dying stars. We have translated the vibrational language of gas giants. We once held a peaceful diplomatic conference with a species that communicates entirely through controlled sneezing. We are not easily unsettled. And yet, when those 2 humans stood in the field, looked up at our invisible ship, and one of them casually said, "Yeah, that's definitely a UFO, 3rd one this month," I felt something shift in my thoracic cavity that my species does not technically have a name for. We called an emergency meeting. Options, I said, standing at the head of the briefing table, maintaining absolute composure, which I want to emphasize. Navigation, Officer Drell pulled up the data. In the past 72 hours, humans on various parts of the planet had attempted to communicate with us using flashlights in what appeared to be an improvised code, launched small unmanned vehicles in our general direction out of what could only be described as casual curiosity, posted our ship's location coordinates on something called Reddit, and one individual in a place called Ohio had actually filed a formal complaint with his local governing authority that we were parked in his view of the stars and he would like us to move. A complaint about our parking. We reviewed our classification files. The humans were supposed to be a level 2 civilization, barely spacefaring, still figuring out how to talk to each other without arguments. Definitely not supposed to notice us, let alone be mildly inconvenienced by us. Recommendation? I asked Drell. We could leave, Drell offered. We are not leaving, I said. We are observers. We do not leave because a level 2 species spots us and sends a strongly worded message to their local council. It wasn't strongly worded, Priel said, pulling up the translated document. It was 4 sentences. The last one says, and I am reading this correctly, also they've been here 3 days and they haven't even said hello, which is just rude. The ship was quiet for a very long moment. It says rude. I asked. It says rude, Priel confirmed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, behind 47 planetary surveys and 11 first contacts, and 2 awards for calm under pressure, a very small alarm started ringing. It was not a loud alarm. It was a kind of quiet, polite alarm that says very softly, "You have made a mistake somewhere, and it is about to become everyone's problem." I chose to ignore it. We proceed with standard protocol. I announced, "Control first contact." We reveal ourselves on our terms. We maintain the narrative. What happened next changed the narrative entirely. Field report continued. Submitted by Senior Observer Voss. Status: still alive. Barely. We decided to make contact on our terms. I want to emphasize the phrase, our terms, because looking back at it now, with the benefit of hindsight and several strong cups of El Hari root extract, I understand that the terms were never ours. They were never even close to ours. We simply did not know that yet, and ignorance, as I have learned from studying humans, can be a remarkably comfortable place to live right up until it is not. We sent a transmission. Formal, precise, translated into 17 of their primary languages. It said in clean, careful words, "People of Earth, we come in the spirit of understanding. We request a meeting." We expected panic, screaming, religious upheaval, possibly a military response involving those charming little explosive projectiles they are so fond of. What we received 11 minutes later was a reply. It said, "Sure, when works for you. Also, fair warning, there are going to be cameras." Priel stared at the message for a very long time. They asked about our schedule. Priel said, "I see that," I said. "They are worried about cameras." Priel said, "I see that too," I said. We landed in a field outside a mid-sized human settlement. We had chosen a location for its remoteness, its low population density, and its general lack of official infrastructure. We had calculated a 73% probability that we would land unobserved. There were 46 humans already waiting when we touched down. Several of them were holding signs. One sign said, "Welcome." One sign said, "We come in pizza." One sign, held by a small child near the front, said, "You are my favorite." I did not know what I had done to earn that, but I will admit quietly, and only in this report, that it was affecting. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was of average height for his species, wearing informal clothing, and holding 2 paper cups of a liquid our scanners identified as coffee. He walked directly up to the landing ramp. He looked at me with the calm, steady expression of someone who had prepared extensively for a moment and was now refusing to let it overwhelm him, which I respected enormously. He held out one of the cups. "I didn't know what you drink," he said, "but I figure I'd offer anyway. I'm Marco. Nice to meet you." My entire diplomatic training, all 40 years of it, did not contain a single protocol for this. I took the cup. Our appendages are not designed for cylindrical containers, but I managed. "I am Voss," I said, "Senior Observer." "Cool," Marco said. He sipped his coffee. He looked at the ship. He looked at my crew, who were standing in the ramp doorway with expressions I can only describe as professionally bewildered. He looked back at me. "She's a beautiful ship," he said. "What'd she run on?" We talked for 3 hours. Not about treaties. Not about territorial claims or biological containment protocols, or any of the 17 formal agenda items I had prepared in a color-coded document. We talked because Marco asked questions, and the questions were so specific and so genuinely curious that answering them felt less like diplomacy and more like telling a story to someone who actually wanted to hear it. He asked how far we had traveled. He asked what the journey looked like. He asked, and I found this one startling, whether we got lonely out here. I told him carefully that extended observation missions could be isolating. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I did a long research post in Antarctica once. 8 months. Felt the same way. You start talking to the penguins after a while." Behind me, I heard Priel make a sound that in our language roughly translates to suppressed laughter trying to disguise itself as a cough. More humans drifted over. They were, without exception, curious. Not aggressive. Not terrified. A woman named B asked Drell whether our navigation system used anything like quantum entanglement, then launched into a 15-minute explanation of her own theoretical framework for why it should. Drell, who has a doctorate in stellar cartography and has never in his professional life been intellectually challenged by a level 2 species, sat down on a rock and engaged with her completely. I watched his expression shift from patient tolerance to genuine interest in real time. It was extraordinary. A teenager asked one of our engineers to sign his jacket. Our engineer signed his jacket. And then something happened that I will include in this report because it is relevant, and not because it still keeps me awake during sleep cycles, which it does. An older woman, quiet, standing near the edge of the group, walked up to me when the crowd had thinned. She looked at me the way humans look at something they have been thinking about for a very long time. She said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I said yes, mostly because I did not know how to say no to that particular tone of voice. She said, "Is it strange coming here, seeing us? We're so small compared to all of that." She gestured at the sky. "Does it ever feel sad to you, watching civilizations that don't know yet how big everything is?" I did not answer immediately, because the honest answer was yes. In 47 surveys, watching species stumble through their early centuries, making enormous mistakes and asking small questions, and looking up at the stars with that particular brand of hunger that has no name in any language I have ever learned, yes, it was sometimes sad. It was also sometimes the most remarkable thing I had ever witnessed. I told her something close to that. She nodded. She patted my arm, which our species does not do, and which I did not expect, and which I found I did not mind. "Well," she said, "for what it's worth, we're glad you finally said hello." We left the next morning. The formal report I submitted to the Galactic Harmonics Council was 11 pages and included 37 data points and a revised threat assessment. The revised threat level for humanity was not high, or medium, or even technically a threat at all. The classification I submitted was one we had never used before. It simply read, "Unpredictable, warm, recommend further contact at earliest opportunity." Priel asked me on the journey home what I thought of them. I thought about Marco and his coffee cup, about be dismantling Drell's assumptions in a field outside a small human town, about a child with a sign, and an old woman who asked the right question. "I think," I said carefully, "that we came here to observe them." I looked out at the stars. "I think they observed us back." Priel smiled, which in our species is a very small movement, almost invisible. "And?" Priel asked, and I said, "I think we were not prepared for that at all." The ship was quiet after that, a good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something shifts permanently and without apology, and you realize on the long way home that the galaxy is bigger than your maps and stranger than your reports, and that somewhere on a small blue planet that smells like rain and coffee, and something called Ohio, 46 humans had stood in a field and decided, without hesitation, to say hello back. We were not ready for them. We should have been.